This meeting is being recorded.
Yeah, not sure why it won't let me record and speak. A little while back, I don't know what it was. Zoom just decided that the app on the computer just wasn't going to work for me anymore. So I can only log in through the browser. And for
Mhm.
some reason, the browser, you can't share your screen and talk. So I don't know what that's about, but we're going to give it a couple minutes to see if we're going to get anybody else joining. I had a
Yeah.
few people say they had some stuff going on, but maybe one or two straggle in a couple minutes late.
Mhm.
How's training and everything going for you, though?
Pretty well. Right now, this week, I'm just taking it easy. Kind of starting to lift again, just like to get my body conditioned again, just for like general preparation.
Yeah.
Other than that, pretty well. Didn't get injured in my fight, so like I'm feeling like I'm ready to go. But obviously, need to
Take your
take some.
time still, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always one of those things. It's a tough balance to find because even if the body feels good, like even if you don't feel like you got hurt, right?
Mhm.
It's like you've still been through a lot. You've been through a whole training camp. You've been through that adrenaline. Like when you're walking out to fight, like
Mhm.
you're gonna have some nerves, some adrenaline pumping, and all of that.
Yeah,
And even
exactly.
if all you do is deliver impact, like I know a couple of my guys before, like they've hurt themselves more hitting the other guy than they have by getting hit.
I'm kind of in the same boat. Like one of my shins is pretty sore because I like kicking legs a lot, and sure it works. But then like a couple of days later, your own shin is starting to like to hurt. I'm like, perfect.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, I don't know if you know John Moore. He's in
Mhm.
Calgary too. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
been working with him for over a year and a half now, and like he just went out and fought
and FLA, the East Coast. Yeah,
yeah, for FLA, and he was saying the same thing. He said like like the day or two after the fight, it's like he could feel the indent in his
yeah,
shin from where he head kicked the guy like 3 times.
yeah.
And it's just like it's too funny. Like the only sport where like you're hurting yourself by
It just so shows how much humans were not supposed to hit others or other things.
exactly right. But for some reason, it's a natural instinct, and we want to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, all right, so I'm gonna get started, but before we get started into the next energy system, any big like major takeaway from the aerobic system, like anything that you weren't maybe thinking about before, uh, different kind of way of looking at things?
For me, it just I really liked how you, I guess, differentiated between the capacity and power. Because for me, whenever I did aerobic, it was always like, oh, it was always just capacity. And sure, once in a while, let's say I'll throw an example. If I'm jogging for 30 minutes, every 3 minutes I'll do like a 30-second sprint or something like that. So I guess that would be close enough to the idea of the aerobic power.
Yeah, you're getting a little more there for sure. Like not the best way to train it, but it's hitting that system a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. But like beside that, like I wasn't really aware of it. So usually that sprint will be more of like to challenge myself than the idea of like working aerobic power. And
Yeah.
like I definitely believe that might be something I'm lacking in my own training. Um, because yeah, I can, let's say, last a long time, but like sometimes I feel that like my recovery might be slower on some days than others. So that's
Yeah.
definitely something I try to implement in my own training.
Yeah, man, that makes sense. I mean, it's one thing like what I see a lot, especially specializing in combat sports athletes, what I see a lot, right, is guys, nobody, like I've never worked with an athlete that doesn't want to train hard,
Mhm.
right? It's like all like if you're a fighter, you want to train hard. Like none of them are like taking it seriously, turning pro and just half-assing
Mhm.
anything, right? But the difference is there's a difference between working hard and being intentional about how you work hard,
Mhm.
right? And the intentional, like you're doing that 30-second sprint every 3 minutes while you jog, you're trying to push yourself, you're trying to challenge yourself, which is good, but not so much with that intention of like, this is a different part of the energy system that I'm working and I'm building my body in a different way by doing it.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Whereas if you can break it down more and be like, yeah, I'm going to actually concentrate on building aerobic power
Mhm.
Now you're going to have that much more of an effect from it, right? Because you're actually taking concentrated time and saying, this is what I'm going to focus on, and this is how I'm going to do it,
Yeah.
right?
Like another example, I guess, that I use, but I think that would be more that would like tackle more the anaerobic system because so let's say for my last fight, that's what I was doing, and and like it works for me. What I did is like my round is 5 minutes, so I did 3 5-minute rounds, and in that 5-minute round, what I did is, let's say, 10 seconds, like I throw a combo, and it's like a super hard combo in the bag. It's an all-out combo, and then for the 50 seconds, it's just focusing on moving around, so like type of an active rest.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm assuming it might like help the aerobic capacity, but like then because it's all an all-out output, then I guess it's more anaerobic.
Yeah, and so that's definitely more anaerobic, which like they all work together, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Is the anaerobic lactic system, because we have two anaerobic systems in the body.
Yeah.
So just give me 1 second, and I'm going to get the slides all set up for me to be able to see them, but unfortunately, I still can't share them. So
Oh, good.
yeah, so basically, like the quick recap of the aerobic system, right?
Mhm.
Is so the quick recap of the aerobic system is basically look at it as the body's generator. So like that thing always working in the background, it's always refueling the anaerobic system, which is the primary movers, like what's throwing those explosive punches and kicks and everything that you're doing.
Mhm.
Those are anaerobic movements, but they're refueled by the aerobic system. So
Mhm.
you gas out when the anaerobic system uses the energy before the aerobic system can regenerate it.
Mhm. Yeah, that
Right.
makes sense.
Basically, to break it down very, very simply, like there's obviously a lot more happening in there, but that's the basic idea of it.
Mhm.
Uh, so we'll get into today anaerobic lactic system. So, like
Mhm.
I mentioned, there's two anaerobic systems in the body. And today we're going to talk about the anaerobic lactic system, which is basically the bridge between aerobic and anaerobic.
Oh, okay.
So when you like I'm sure you've heard of like lactic acid and how it like makes the muscles super sore, and that's kind of what creates that like onset muscle soreness.
Yeah.
That's actually false. So lactate, when you build that up, is actually used to prolong energy production. And
All
so
right.
we'll go through today a little bit about how lactate is actually created in the body, and then
Mhm.
in turn, how the body uses it to continue to produce energy. So, like, I won't go too in depth in it because there's a lot of sciencey stuff in there.
Yeah.
And basically, when the body produces lactate, it's also producing hydrogen. And what's like the idea now is that it's apparently the hydrogen atoms that actually create the hydrogen ions, sorry, that actually create that muscle soreness because they interfere with muscle contraction. So your muscles aren't contracting the same way. And in turn, that's when they start to feel extra sore like that.
Mhm.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, maximum intensity movements or higher intensity movements, like we were talking about for MMA, that's punches, kicks, explosive takedowns, things like that.
Mhm.
Those all require energy faster than the aerobic system can provide it. So that means you're using anaerobic energy every time you're exploding in like that, right? And the anaerobic lactic system, essentially the way it works is it's using stored sugar in the body to produce ATP, which is the body's stored energy.
Mhm.
And while it's producing ATP through that process where it's breaking down the sugar, it's also creating lactate.
Mhm.
And lactate is actually a fuel source for the aerobic system.
Mhm.
So this is going to be the way to break it down. And this one's always the hardest one to like get the point across of kind of how it works. But essentially, our fast twitch muscle fibers, the more anaerobic fibers that we have, go through what we call anaerobic glycolysis, which is the sugar breakdown in the body,
Mhm.
which creates lactate. And now the aerobic system uses that lactate to work more efficiently and in turn continue to fuel the anaerobic system. So that's kind of how it all works in a circle. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the lactate is actually the fuel source for the aerobic system. I realized I wrote anaerobic in the slides, so my bad. I'll make sure to change that. So if the anaerobic lactic system is not well trained,
Mhm.
that leads to inefficient production and utilization of lactate. So that means that the body's not producing lactate at the right rate, which means the aerobic system's not functioning well enough, which means the aerobic system can't refuel the anaerobic system. That makes
Mhm.
sense? I know that's a lot of kind of different points coming at you. Any questions on that? Anything that's not quite clear?
No, I'm getting it.
Okay, cool. And that is actually what causes that deep burning fatigue when you don't have that system well trained. Because
Mhm.
what starts to happen is the aerobic system's not functioning at a high enough capacity. And then, so as the lactate and the hydrogen and everything get produced, it starts to accumulate. And that's the anaerobic threshold, which is where we start to feel that muscular fatigue,
Okay.
right? So essentially, the anaerobic lactic system is the bridge between anaerobic work and aerobic work.
Mhm.
And so better lactic capacity means that you're more efficiently producing lactate, which in turn is delaying your feeling of fatigue in the body. And
Mhm.
this is more the muscular fatigue. So like that feeling of like a sprint and the burning in your lungs is very different than like that feeling of just deep burning fatigue in the muscles,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? So this is more that muscular fatigue. If those processes aren't working well enough in the body, then that's where you start to feel that deep burning in the muscles, and you just have that feeling of like, I'm sure you've probably experienced it once or twice when like you go to start the last round of a fight and like there's just nothing left in your body.
Oh yeah.
And definitely not somewhere you want to be more than once, right? Yeah, and so that's the whole idea behind this is the system that essentially continues to help everything operate. It fuels the aerobic system, which then refuels the anaerobic system and just keeps that going on repeat.
Mhm.
So now obviously it comes down to how do we train it, right? Because the key with energy system development as a whole is that you are balancing these properly, right? If you do all aerobic work and no anaerobic work, you're missing pieces. If you do all anaerobic work, no aerobic work, you're missing pieces. You got to find the way to balance it properly. So the anaerobic lactic system specifically, building that bridge, improving that ability to produce and use lactate in the body. So we can either go through lactic capacity work, and essentially the way this works is it's 90 to 120 seconds of work, so a minute and a half to 2 minutes of work with 1 to 2 minutes of rest for 6 to 12 sets.
Mhm.
And for that 90 seconds to 2 minutes, the goal here is to keep as high of a consistent pace as you can. So by
Oh
the end of that work set, by the end of that work set, you should be like everything should be burning, but you
Mhm.
shouldn't be dead, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Right? You're not trying, like, I usually do stuff like this on a bike. And on the bike, you're not trying to like start at a flat out sprint and go absolutely as hard as you can. You take 2 minutes and you push as hard as you can for the entire duration of that 2 minutes,
Mhm.
right? Keeping a high, consistent pace and building that high, consistent pace, followed by 1 to 2 minutes of rest, is going to focus on your body's ability to work while it's tired, and then in turn focus on your body's ability to better use the lactate and better fuel your aerobic system. And as that's starting to happen, you're delaying the onset of that muscular fatigue. That
Mhm.
all makes sense?
Yeah.
And so when you're setting those sessions up, essentially the way I would do it is when you're newer to training this system, start on the lower end, right? So start with 90 seconds of work and 2 minutes of rest.
Mhm.
But then as you get more efficient and as your pace starts improving, you take that 90 seconds and you move it longer. You go 90 seconds up to, a minute 45 up to 2 minutes. And then you start decreasing that rest time.
Mhm.
And then 6 to 12 sets, same idea. You want to continually bump those sets up as you get more efficient at it.
Mhm.
And in turn, you're going to keep building your ability to wow, lost my words completely, but keep building your ability to buffer fatigue. So to delay the onset of fatigue. And that's going to be longer and longer and longer in like hard grappling exchanges and things like that before you feel that just like straight up burn in your arms where you're like, holy fuck, I can't do this anymore if I tried.
Yeah.
That'll make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Beautiful. And then, so the other main way to train it is lactic explosive repeat sessions. So the explosive repeat sessions is, again, this is all maximum effort explosiveness. So you should be at 100% the whole time. And if physically you're dropping below 100%, stop, because the goal is to have you at 100%, right? So if you're doing something like squat jumps and you're trying to do it for too long, the jumps start looking crappy. They're not explosive. You're not getting high off the ground. You've gone too far to be training this system. Make sense?
Yeah.
So with these ones, essentially what you're going to do is 12 to 40 seconds of work, nothing more, with 10 to 30 seconds of rest. And this is just going to improve your ability to, again, move at maximum intensity, moving at full speed. And then with that, being able to move at full speed for longer and being able to recover faster by training the lactic capacity, right? Now you're training your ability. Like, think about those times where like you have a guy hurt, you jump in to try to finish, he survives, you step out, now you're going, oh shit, I don't have any energy left, right? This is your ability to step back out, recover quickly, and jump back on him, right? That makes sense?
Yeah.
Beautiful. So that is the anaerobic lactic system in a whole. Any questions or anything based off of any of the stuff we talked about here?
For the lactic explosive repeat, how many sets, let's say, would you do it?
Usually the main focus with those is that you're at maximum intensity, right? So it's like, because you're at such a high effort level the whole time.
Yeah.
If you do that for 3 sets and then you're feeling like, I can't keep going at that same high intensity, cut it at 3 sets, and that's well trained, right? But obviously the better athlete you are and the more explosive you are, the more sets of that you're going to be able to do. But the main thing that I want to get across to anybody watching this is, this one is less about how many sets can I do and more about how high I can keep my intensity. Right? If you start to get to that point where the, squat jumps or med ball slams are 2 of my favorite ones for these sessions. And if you start to get to that point where like everything's burning and you just don't have any power left in your jump or your slam or whatever other exercise you're using to do this, then you've done too many sets.
Makes sense.
And it's like, if that's 5, that's 5. If that's 12, that's 12. But the goal should be that as soon as that intensity drops, done.
Okay, I see. Makes sense.
Yeah. Sweet, man. Anything else from that?
No, you explained pretty well.
Beautiful. I always strive to, but I want to make sure that I'm answering any questions or anything that come up. So yeah, man, that's fantastic. And then so basically tomorrow we're gonna go over anaerobic alactic. And I know you said you were training. It's probably gonna be a little bit after 7 because I'm at the gym and I finish right at 7. So it's probably gonna be like 7:15 tomorrow, but I'll drop that message in the group.
Sounds good.
And then and then on Thursday, what we're gonna do is go over how to program them together. So basically how to balance all 3 when you're training for a fight to be able to get the most out of all 3 systems.
Makes sense. Yeah, I'm excited for that one. Because I have the basic knowledge of like the aerobic part and the anaerobic part. And like obviously not everything, because I learned a lot just from those 2 sessions. But like it's the combination of everything, because at least previously I found myself overtraining because like, well, I need to lift, I need to work on my explosiveness, and then like, well, I need cardio too. So then I need to sneak on those 2. And then I don't have any energy for the training itself. So.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's one of the main things I always strive to bring to athletes of mine is like, we want to do as much of all of this work as possible, obviously. But the main thing is you need your skill set to be on point too. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, if you're so focused on all my conditioning has to be exactly perfect, and then you're not doing any MMA training leading into an MMA fight, probably not going to go well for you. Right. But if we can find the way to best balance it, and be able, so like some guys are much busier. And when I've got guys who have super packed schedules, I'm throwing in 1 to 2 sessions a week on top of what they're doing to just continually progress them, right? When I have guys who are more open, sweet, we can throw in 3, 4, 5 sessions a week, do that much more. And we got to find the right balance that you're going to be as in shape as possible, as healthy as possible, and have your skill set as high level as possible.
Yeah,
Right.
makes
If
sense.
we're not taking into account all 3 of those things, we're in trouble in some way or another.
Yeah.
And then what some guys do, right, is they go too hard at the skills training, and they're doing so much skills training every single day that they neglect this stuff, and then they come into their fight and the skill set feels great, but then they burn out in a minute and a half and get overtaken and they lose anyway, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's like such a delicate balance, but that's what's so much fun about it too.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And any big takeaway in particular from this one? Like anything that you maybe didn't know before or thinking about a little differently?
Definitely explain to me what's anaerobic lactic is, because before it was just like another type of anaerobic work for me,
Yeah.
or understanding at least back then. Now it makes sense. Like what the moment you said bridge, it just like started to click in.
Oh,
Yeah, the moment you said it's the bridge between aerobic and anaerobic, I'm like, oh, okay, that really makes sense to me now. So yeah, that one really, like, now I know what it is pretty much.
yeah,
And-
yeah. Awesome. I'm really glad that that makes sense because yeah, this is always the one. Like one thing I try to make sure I'm doing right is I'm explaining things to athletes. I'm not trying to like use all the science and everything behind it because I want it to actually make sense.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And that's like, I always try to make sure I'm doing that while I coach too. Cause like, if I start going into, everything that's happening on the cellular level, like most guys are looking at me like, shut up. But explaining it like this is definitely the toughest one to really put into words because like anaerobic is max effort explosive. Aerobic is longer duration, lower intensity, right? That's easy. But then what's this one, right? It's kind of a hard balance of like, it's high intensity, but not max intensity. And it's longer duration, but not as long duration. So I'm glad that that bridge analogy made sense.
Yeah.
Sweet, man. So if you can do me a huge favor and just go to that group on the training app and just post that biggest takeaway from today, I'd greatly appreciate that. Just to let other people know too, kind of what you got out of it. And then that way, when they're watching everything back, they can have a little bit of insight from you as well. That sound good?
Yeah, I'll do it right now.
Beautiful, man. I really appreciate that. So have an awesome rest of your night. And I guess I won't see you Wednesday, but I'll see you on Thursday.
Yeah.
Perfect. I'll see you then. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much.